Hi Emma, thank you for being here today.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. So let's start. I'd like to get a little bit deeper into your journey. Everyone in Brussels has a story, so I'm really interested to know what's yours and what brought you to this city and this world.
Thanks. Firstly, I'd like to say it's one of the things I love about Brussels is that everybody does have a story, a different way of finding themselves here. I think mine isn't so much that it was a journey here. It started here. I was born in Brussels to English parents. I grew up listening to discussions around, well, first listening to and then contributing to discussions around EU politics, legislative files that were being discussed. So naturally, I think I was inevitably going to gravitate back here. I did leave. I studied in the UK for a number of years. I did a bit of work also in the UK and in France. But I think the draw of EU politics brought me back here. And then I think my story becomes the classic story of being in Brussels. I started as a Blue Book trainee in DG Home in the European Commission, moved into a trade association representing the toy sector, and then for the best part of a decade was a consultant. And I think that's where those were my kind of formative years in public affairs and communications, learning. I learned a lot. I was exposed to different policies, environment, agriculture, digital, financial services. I'm probably forgetting a few sectors, but yeah, I loved it. And then most recently, I've moved back into a trade association.
And now a little bit more about the bubble that you're from and that you're operating in. Imagine explaining your day-to-day job to somebody who's outside of what you do. I'm curious about what would surprise them the most.
I think what would surprise anyone about the Brussels bubble is possibly how human public affairs and the Brussels bubble is, and how creative. So I think a lot of people think that public affairs is traditional public affairs, sitting in an office, watching committee votes, deep diving into legislative files. And I think whilst obviously that is part of our day-to-day, I think the majority and most of my day is actually around storytelling, building trust, strategy, and a little bit of improvisation. So it's a lot about kind of sitting down, listening, putting our position forward, but also at the same time, and that's where the improvisation, kind of adapting to find some way to continue the dialogue or find a common ground. And I think that's what would surprise. I think a lot of people think policymaking starts and ends with the politician, and there's a lot in between that happens. Obviously, there's a lot of granular detail, as I mentioned, in terms of knowing the file, knowing what's going on, the latest developments. But the other side of it is the human side, the building partnerships, collaborating with other organizations, interacting with those who don't necessarily agree with you. And yeah, that's what I love about it.
I love it. And on the same line, what is a myth about your industry that you wish you could burst once and for all?
Okay. There's probably a number of myths that I would like to pop the balloon on. But I think, I'll take two hats. So I would be remiss to ignore my President of SEAP, the Society of European Professionals, and the Lobby of Lobbyists position. But firstly, in terms of the crop protection sector, I think the myth is that if you take away pesticides, there will be no, or crop protection, there will be no effect and no impact. And actually, it's been proven that there will be less yields, a decrease in yields, and increased food waste. I think for us, it's about the toolbox. It's not the farmer knows when and where to apply these products, and as part of the integrated pest management. But For us, it's about the toolbox, making sure that the farmer has all the tools and technology they need to do what they need to do best. And then if I take the other side, so just in terms of public affairs and lobbying, as the president of SEAP, I would say the biggest myth is that lobbying is just secret influence and that we all are dodgy individuals pulling strings from behind closed doors. And actually, I would like to say that that's not the case. We encourage transparency, ethical lobbying, and I think the majority of public affairs professionals in Brussels abide by that. So,
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on to your personal growth, has there been any mistake, missteps, or a decision that's still through which you learned something that you still carry today?
I think we're always learning. I think, very early on in my career, I made the ultimate email sin and received an email from my boss asking me to, this was a long time ago, so I'll cast my mind back, asking me to attend an event or go somewhere, take me out of the office and away from my desk. At the time, I was very overwhelmed, stressed with the workload I had, and just not necessarily juggling my tasks and the priorities very well. I forwarded said email to a colleague to kind of vent a little bit, but also try and understand how am I meant to juggle all of these different priorities. I hadn't actually clicked forward, I had clicked reply. So the email went back to my boss. Ironically, I didn't even know that I'd clicked to reply until my boss replied and incidentally offered to take on the task that she had asked me to do. But yeah, it's funny now. I have to admit I was utterly mortified at the time and wanted the ground to swallow me up. But I think it taught me, obviously, for one, don't put anything in an email that you can't own and you won't own. And also never get to that point that you're so stressed that you can't see how to navigate your workload.
Amazing. Mortifying, I can imagine, but quite a nice story.
Yeah.
Now, is there a hill that you're willing to die on, even if others disagree? And it can be from your sector, from the Brussels bubble in general.
There's probably a lot of hills I would die on. But I think, overall, and I'm not sure, I would hope that nobody would disagree with me, but yeah, better regulation and transparency. For us, as I said, at SEAP, it's a huge priority for us to ensure transparency and ethical lobbying for us to maintain our ability to operate in this city and towards the EU institutions. But I think also for better regulation, these aren't principles that are nice to have and you pick and choose when you use them. They should be integrated into all policy making. And I'm very happy to see that the Commission has obviously got it on its work programme for next year. But yeah, I think overall those elements would be something that I will continue to champion.
What is the biggest challenge that you see on the horizon for your sector?
I think the biggest challenge is innovation, keeping up with innovation. There's a huge innovation gap in Europe. For our sector, that in crop protection, we have new conventional pesticides, biopesticides, and unfortunately the regulatory framework is slightly slower or at times is not there to enable this innovation to come to Europe. And I think going forward we need to future-proof regulation. We need to anticipate what is coming and not try and just regulate what is now.
Is there somebody in your field who you respect deeply, even if you disagree with them?
I think that's the nature of Brussels, is there's always people that will not necessarily sit on the same side as you, and have a difference of opinion. I think I respect those who are consistent and have a very transparent conviction, and by that I mean that are consistent with their message and their position on a specific topic, but that are very transparent and you know where they're coming from, what and why, what motivates them and why they're doing it.
Amazing. And now, my favorite question. If your Brussels journey had a soundtrack, which song or songs would be on it and why?
I'm a big Taylor Swift fan.
Love it.
So I guess I'd have to choose one of her songs. I'd choose probably The Archer. It's possibly not one of her most known songs, but it's not only about the power that she speaks about in the song, but also about the fragility. And I think if you look at public affairs and communications or advocacy as a whole, it's very powerful, but it's quite exposing. So you need to be prepared. So in terms of your messages and things like that, but you also need to anticipate changes. You need to be vulnerable to potentially having to shift tack or direction. And that sometimes means that you need to take a step back and acknowledge that your original decision wasn't the right one because the environment has changed, the landscape is different and things. So it is very much, or how I hope I operate, is very much both kind of strategic and decisive, but also at the same time vulnerable and open to maybe having to change.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.